From left-handed Liverpool teenager to the most successful musician in history, discover how Paul McCartney helped create the Beatles, survived their breakup, and built a solo career spanning 6 decades. This is the ultimate story of musical genius, resilience, and the power of never stopping the music.
Narrative: Sir Paul McCartney, the eternal Beatle in a modest terraced house on Forthlin Road in Allerton, Liverpool. A left-handed teenager sat backwards with his father's old acoustic guitar, struggling to play chords that felt impossible until he realized he could simply flip the instrument and restring it the opposite way, unknowingly making his first step toward revolutionizing popular music forever. This wasn't just any working-class lad with musical aspirations. This was James Paul McCartney, whose melodic genius, relentless work ethic, and ability to reinvent himself across 6 decades would make him the most commercially successful musician in history, while helping to create the cultural phenomenon that transformed for Liverpool teenagers into the most famous people on earth. Born on June 18, 1942, in Liverpool's Walton Hospital during the height of World War II, Paul entered a world where German bombers regularly attacked the city's vital docks and shipyards, creating an atmosphere of constant uncertainty that would shape his generation's appreciation for music, friendship, and the precious nature of life itself. His birth during wartime Britain meant his earliest years were marked by rationing, blackout curtains, and the ever-present possibility that any day might bring devastating air raids that could destroy everything familiar and safe. His father, Jim McCartney, was a cotton salesman and part-time musician who had played piano in various dance bands during the 1920s and 1930s, filling their home with music that ranged from traditional British music hall songs to American jazz standards that had crossed the Atlantic. Jim's musical background provided Paul with his first exposure to melody, harmony, and the magic of how songs could capture emotions and memories in ways that ordinary conversation never could, while also demonstrating that music could be both a source of joy and a potential means of earning a living. His mother, Mary Patricia McCartney, worked as a midwife and later as a health visitor, bringing her own strength and compassion to a household where music was important but practical concerns about housing, food, and education were constant realities. Mary's Irish Catholic background added another layer to Paul's cultural foundation, while her medical profession exposed the family to both the fragility of life and the importance of caring for others, values that would later influence Paul's approach to songwriting and his lifelong commitment to various charitable causes. The post-war years in Liverpool were marked by economic struggle and social change, but also by an influx of American culture through radio broadcasts, imported records, and the presence of American servicemen stationed nearby. Paul's childhood was spent absorbing this mixture of British tradition and American innovation, from the music hall entertainer George Formby to the rock and roll pioneers like Elvis Presley and Little Richard, who were revolutionizing popular music across the Atlantic. His first encounter with rock and roll came through Radio Luxembourg, the pirate station that broadcast American music into British homes despite official BBC resistance to this new form of musical expression. Paul would lie in bed with a small radio pressed to his ear, discovering artists like Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, and the Everly Brothers, whose harmonies and melodies would profoundly influence his own songwriting development. This clandestine musical education, conducted under bedsheets to avoid disturbing the household, created his lifelong association between music and discovery, rebellion, and the thrill of finding something new and exciting. The death of his mother Mary in 1956, when Paul was just 14, created the first major trauma of his life, while also intensifying his relationship with music as both escape and emotional outlet. Mary's sudden death from breast cancer devastated the family, leaving Jim to raise Paul and his younger brother Michael alone while struggling with his own grief and the practical challenges of single parenthood. Paul's response to this loss was to throw himself even deeper into music, using his guitar and piano to process emotions he couldn't express in words, while also providing comfort to his grieving father and brother. His meeting with John Lennon at St. Peter's Church Fete in Walton on July 6, 1957, represented one of the most significant musical partnerships in history, beginning with a teenager's audition that lasted only a few minutes but changed everything. Paul's ability to play 20-flight rock note perfect on John's guitar, combined with his knowledge of complete lyrics to songs that John only half remembered, impressed the older boy enough to invite him to join the Quarrymen. This moment marked the beginning of a creative collaboration that would produce some of the most beloved songs in popular music while also containing the seeds of the conflicts that would eventually destroy their partnership. The formation of the Beatles, evolving from the Quarrymen through various name changes and lineup adjustments, represented Paul's education in the practical aspects of being in a band, learning to work with different personalities, navigating the politics of shared creative control, and developing the professional discipline necessary to turn musical talent into commercial success. His role as the band's primary melodic songwriter began during these early years, as his natural gift for memorable tunes complemented John's more experimental and edgy contributions. The addition of George Harrison, despite his youth and initial limitations as a guitarist, created a three-way dynamic that would define the Beatles' internal relationships throughout their career. Paul's relationship with George was particularly complex, as Paul's perfectionism and leadership tendencies sometimes clashed with George's desire for creative equality and recognition as more than just the quiet Beatle whose contributions were overshadowed by the Lennon-McCartney partnership. The grueling apprenticeship in Hamburg's CD Club district from 1960 to 1962 transformed the Beatles from amateur teenage musicians into a tight, professional unit capable of commanding audiences and handling the pressures of live performance. Paul's bass playing, initially adopted out of necessity when Stuart Sutcliffe left the band, evolved from basic rhythm-keeping to melodic innovation that would influence countless bassists while also freeing him to explore more complex songwriting arrangements. The Hamburg experience also introduced Paul to the darker aspects of the music industry, the drugs, alcohol, violence, and exploitation that surrounded popular entertainment in environments where young musicians were vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. His ability to maintain focus on musical development while avoiding the worst excesses that destroyed other promising artists demonstrated both his natural discipline and his understanding that long-term success required preserving his health and talent for the marathon rather than sprinting toward immediate gratification. The return to Liverpool and their residency at the Cavern Club created the devoted local following that would provide the foundation for their eventual international success. Paul's stage presence, combining his natural charm with increasing musical sophistication, made him an audience favorite while his songwriting partnership with John began producing original material that matched and often surpassed the American rock and roll songs they had initially imitated. The addition of Ringo Starr as their permanent drummer in 1962 completed the classic Beatles lineup while also creating the group dynamic that would sustain them through the unprecedented pressures of global fame. Paul's relationship with Ringo was perhaps the most uncomplicated of his Beatles partnerships, based on mutual respect, shared humor, and Ringo's ability to provide the steady rhythmic foundation that allowed Paul's bass playing and melodic contributions to flourish. The recording of Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You in 1962 marked their transformation from live performers to recording artists, introducing Paul to the technical and creative possibilities of the studio environment that would become increasingly important to his artistic development. His fascination with recording technology and production techniques would later drive the Beatles' innovative approach to album making while also preparing him for his post-Beatles career as a producer and multi-instrumentalist. The explosive success of Please Please Me and subsequent early hits demonstrated Paul's understanding of pop music's commercial requirements while maintaining artistic integrity and genuine emotional content. His ability to craft melodies that were both sophisticated and immediately accessible would become his trademark, allowing the Beatles to achieve massive commercial success without compromising their artistic development or cultural significance. Beatlemania, the unprecedented global phenomenon that transformed four young men from Liverpool into the most famous people on earth, tested Paul's psychological resilience while providing him with a platform for artistic expression that few musicians could ever imagine. His role as the Beatles' primary spokesman and most media-friendly member made him the public face of the group while also creating pressures and expectations that would influence every aspect of his life and career. The touring years from 1963 to 1966 saw Paul develop his skills as a live performer while also growing increasingly frustrated with the impossibility of creating sophisticated music in venues where screaming fans made it impossible for the band to hear themselves play. His advocacy for ending touring and focusing on studio work reflected both his musical ambitions and his understanding that the Beatles had outgrown the limitations of live performance in conventional concert settings. His relationship with Jane Asher, the accomplished actress who became his primary romantic partner during the Beatles' peak years, provided him with entry into London's cultural elite while also exposing him to theatre, classical music, and intellectual circles that broadened his Artistic horizons beyond rock and roll. Jane's influence can be heard in songs like Yesterday and Here, There and Everywhere, which demonstrated Paul's growing sophistication as a composer of ballads that transcended typical pop music boundaries. The creation of Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band represented Paul's emergence as the Beatles' primary creative driving force, as his enthusiasm for studio experimentation and conceptual album-making compensated for John's growing disinterest in the collaborative process. His contributions to these groundbreaking albums, from Eleanor Rigby to She's Leaving Home, showed his ability to create character-driven narrative songs that combined musical innovation with emotional depth and social observation. His experiments with avant-garde music, electronic sound manipulation, and classical composition during this period reflected his determination to push the Beatles beyond conventional rock music boundaries while also preparing him for a solo career that would eventually encompass multiple musical genres and artistic mediums. His openness to new influences and techniques kept the Beatles at the forefront of musical innovation while also creating tensions with band members who were more comfortable with traditional rock arrangements. The Magical Mystery Tour project, largely driven by Paul's vision and enthusiasm, demonstrated both his creative ambitions and his limitations as a filmmaker and project manager. While the television special was critically panned and commercially unsuccessful, the music created for the project included some of the Beatles' most adventurous work while showing Paul's willingness to take creative risks even when the results were uncertain. The Apple Corps experiment, conceived as an alternative to traditional record company structures that would give artists more creative and financial control, reflected Paul's business acumen and his desire to use the Beatles' success to benefit other musicians. However, the company's rapid evolution into a chaotic money pit demonstrated the gap between idealistic intentions and practical business management, while also contributing to the tensions that would eventually split the band. His relationship with Linda Eastman, whom he met in 1967 and married in 1969, provided him with the personal stability and creative partnership that would sustain him through the Beatles' breakup and his subsequent solo career. Linda's background in photography and her family's connections to the entertainment industry brought new perspectives to Paul's work, while her unwavering support allowed him to take artistic risks and explore new musical directions without fear of personal or professional consequences. The recording of Abbey Road, which many consider the Beatles' finest album, represented both the peak of their collaborative abilities and the swan song of their partnership, as personal and creative differences made it increasingly clear that the group had reached the end of their natural lifespan. Paul's contributions to the album, particularly the medley that closes side 2, demonstrated his ability to create cohesive artistic statements from fragmentary musical ideas while also serving as a farewell to the most important creative relationship of his life. The legal battles surrounding the Beatles' breakup, particularly Paul's lawsuit to dissolve the partnership and his conflicts with Alan Klein, forced him to confront the business realities of the music industry while also dealing with the emotional trauma of losing both his creative partnership with John and his identity as a member of the world's most successful band. His decision to fight for financial control rather than accept unfavorable management decisions showed his determination to protect his artistic legacy and financial future, even at the cost of personal relationships and public popularity. The formation of Wings in 1971 represented Paul's attempt to recapture the joy of collaborative music making while establishing his credentials as a successful artist independent of the Beatles' legacy. The band's evolution from experimental art rock to mainstream pop success demonstrated Paul's ability to adapt to changing musical trends while maintaining his core strengths as a melodic songwriter and performer. His decision to include Linda as a full member of Wings, despite her limited musical experience, reflected both his desire for personal and professional partnership and his willingness to prioritize creative chemistry over conventional technical proficiency. Linda's gradual development as a musician and songwriter, documented through Wings albums and live performances, showed Paul's abilities as both teacher and collaborator while also creating a unique musical partnership that combined romantic and artistic elements. The commercial and critical success of albums like Band on the Run and Venus and Mars proved that Paul could achieve both artistic satisfaction and commercial success without the Beatles, while his willingness to experiment with different musical styles kept his solo career fresh and unpredictable. His ability to write songs that worked equally well as intimate ballads and arena anthems demonstrated the versatility that would sustain his career across multiple decades and changing musical fashions. His live performances with Wings, particularly the massive stadium shows of the late 1970s, allowed him to reconnect with audiences in ways that had been impossible during the Beatles' final touring years. His natural showmanship and genuine enjoyment of live performance created concert experiences that satisfied both nostalgia for Beatles classics and enthusiasm for his new material, while also demonstrating that he could carry arena-sized venues through the strength of his own catalogue and stage presence. The tragic death of John Lennon in December 1980 devastated Paul personally, while also forcing him to confront his own mortality and the finite nature of creative partnerships that had seemed destined to last forever. His initial public response to John's murder was criticized as inadequate, but his subsequent musical tributes and public statements reveal the depth of his grief and his struggle to process the loss of someone who had been simultaneously his closest collaborator and most complicated relationship. His solo work in the 1980s and beyond showed his determination to continue growing as an artist while also serving as a keeper of the Beatles' legacy for new generations of fans. Albums like Flowers in the Dirt and Flaming Pie demonstrated his ability to create mature, reflective music that acknowledged his past while exploring new emotional and artistic territories appropriate to his changing life circumstances. His ventures into classical music composition, including a Liverpool oratorio and Standing Stone, reflected his lifelong interest in expanding his musical vocabulary while also challenging assumptions about the limitations of rock musicians' artistic capabilities. While these works received mixed critical reception, they demonstrated Paul's willingness to risk failure in pursuit of artistic growth and his understanding that creative development requires constant exploration of new challenges and unfamiliar territories. His marriage to Heather Mills and their subsequent acrimonious divorce represented a personal and public relations disaster that tested his resilience and forced him to confront the realities of fame and fortune in an era of tabloid journalism and social media scrutiny. The experience taught him painful lessons about trust, privacy, and the difference between public image and private reality, while also demonstrating his ability to survive personal crises without losing his essential optimism and creativity. His relationship with Nancy Shevell, whom he married in 2011, provided him with renewed personal happiness and stability during his 70s, showing that even after decades of fame and multiple relationships, he retained the capacity for emotional growth and genuine partnership. Their marriage, conducted with much more privacy and dignity than his previous relationships, reflected his growing wisdom about balancing public life with personal fulfillment. His continued touring and recording into his 80s has demonstrated both his remarkable physical stamina and his genuine love of musical performance, as audiences worldwide continue responding enthusiastically to both his classic songs and new material. His concerts have become multi-generational celebrations of popular music history, where grandparents share Beatles memories with grandchildren discovering these songs for the first time. The knighthood he received in 1997 represented formal recognition of his contributions to British culture and music, while his subsequent honours and awards have acknowledged both his artistic achievements and his charitable work supporting various causes including animal rights, environmental protection, and music education. His use of his fame and resources to support causes he believes in has demonstrated that celebrity status can be used responsibly to benefit society rather than merely enriching the individual celebrity. His business acumen, particularly his ownership of valuable music publishing rights and his careful management of his artistic legacy, has made him one of the wealthiest musicians in history, while also ensuring that his work will continue generating income and cultural influence long after his death. His understanding of intellectual property rights and commercial music has allowed him to maintain control over his artistic output while also maximizing its financial potential. The numerous biographical works, documentaries, and academic studies of Paul's career have established him as one of the most thoroughly analyzed figures in popular culture, while also revealing the complexity of someone who has successfully balanced artistic integrity with commercial success across multiple decades. The ongoing scholarly and critical interest in his work demonstrates that his contributions to popular music extend far beyond entertainment to encompass genuine artistic and cultural significance. His influence on subsequent generations of musicians can be heard in everything from indie rock to hip-hop, as artists continue drawing inspiration from his melodic sensibility, production innovations, and approach to songcraft. His willingness to mentor younger musicians and support emerging talent has helped perpetuate his artistic legacy while also contributing to the continued vitality of popular music as an art form today. Sir Paul McCartney represents the rare combination of artistic genius, commercial success, personal resilience, and social responsibility that defines the highest achievements in popular culture. His journey from working-class Liverpool teenager to global icon demonstrates that extraordinary talent, combined with determination, adaptability, and genuine human connection, can create artistic legacies that transcend individual achievement to become permanent parts of human cultural heritage. From that backward guitar in his childhood home to sold-out stadium shows in his 80s, Paul's story proves that the most enduring art comes from authentic emotional expression combined with relentless craftsmanship and the courage to continue growing throughout an entire lifetime. His legacy reminds us that the greatest artists are not those who achieve early success and then rest on their accomplishments, but those who continue exploring, learning, and sharing their gifts with the world regardless of age, fame, or external expectations.
Paul's journey proves that true artists never stop growing. From Cavern Club to Knighthood, he showed us that creativity and passion can sustain extraordinary careers across entire lifetimes. Subscribe for more music legend stories. Like if Paul's music shaped your life, share your favorite Beatles or Wings song.